The elevator to the penthouse of the Thorne Tower didn't hum. It glided, a silent, silver bullet shooting straight into the stratosphere of Manhattan. For Natalie, the 40-second descent was a daily transition between two irreconcilable worlds. Down below, on the gray, slush-covered streets of the Lower East Side, she was Natalie the struggler, the girl with the mounting student loans and the coat that wasn't quite warm enough for November. But the moment the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, she became invisible. She became the help. She stepped into the foyer, and the silence hit her first. It was an expensive silence, the kind that only exists where the windows are triple-paned and the floors are marble. Henry Thorne's penthouse was a masterpiece of modern architecture, a sprawling expanse of chrome, leather, and floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of a city he owned, yet seemed entirely detached from. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it was the beauty of a glacier, breathtaking, cold, and utterly uninhabitable. Natalie adjusted her uniform, pulling the hair tie tighter. She wasn't just cleaning a home, she was curating a museum. Every object in the apartment had a specific place, dictated not by Henry, but by his fiancée, Victoria. Victoria was a woman Natalie had met only once, a whirlwind of blonde ambition and sharp criticism who treated the staff like malfunctioning appliances. She had left a detailed, laminated list on the kitchen island. No streaks on the glass. Polish the silver. Do not touch Mr. Thorne's desk. Natalie moved through the living room, the smell of lemon verbena polish filling the air. She was 26, with eyes the color of autumn leaves and a mind filled with half-written novels she was too exhausted to finish. She scrubbed the surfaces that Henry Thorne touched, erasing fingerprints, erasing life. She often wondered about him. The tabloids called him the Prince of Wall Street, a ruthless negotiator with ice in his veins. But the man who lived here didn't feel ruthless. He felt absent. His home was devoid of personal clutter. No photos of friends, no knickknacks from travels. Just art that matched the sofa and books that looked unread. We build our castles high so no one can see that the rooms inside are empty. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the room in bruised shades of purple and gold. Natalie was in the library, a room she was usually told to skip, but Victoria's list today was specific: dust the shelves. Thoroughly. She was on her tiptoes, reaching for a high shelf, when the front door beeped. She froze. It was only 5 o'clock. Mr. Thorne never returned before 8. The heavy footsteps approached. They were slow, dragging, unlike the confident stride described in the magazines. Henry Thorne walked into the library. He didn't see her at first. He walked straight to the window, loosening his tie with a jerky, frustrated motion, and leaned his forehead against the cold glass. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that was perfectly styled but now slightly disheveled. Even from the back, radiating exhaustion, he was imposing. "I told Victoria I didn't want the staff here in the evenings." His voice was deep, gravelly, and startled Natalie so much she dropped her duster. The soft thud made him turn. Henry looked at her. For a moment, there was no recognition, just the blank stare of a man interrupted. Then his eyes, a piercing, intelligent blue, focused. He didn't look at the uniform, he looked at her face. He saw the flush on her cheeks, the messy wisp of hair escaping her bun. "I apologize, Mr. Thorne," Natalie stammered, bending to pick up the duster, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The list. Miss Victoria asked me to finish the library today. I didn't expect you." "No one expects me," Henry muttered, a strange, bitter smile touching his lips. He walked over to his desk, sinking into the leather chair as if his body weighed 1,000 pounds. He looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that made Natalie feel dangerously seen. "You're new." "I've been here for 3 months, sir," she corrected gently. 3 months, he repeated, rubbing his temples. "And I've never seen you. That says a lot about my life, doesn't it?" He wasn't speaking to her as an employer. He was speaking to the room, to the air, to anyone who wasn't asking him for money or a signature. There was a vulnerability in his posture that contradicted everything she knew about him. "I can leave, sir. I can finish tomorrow," Natalie offered, taking a step toward the door. "No," Henry said, opening a drawer and pulling out a bottle of amber liquid, but not a glass. He just stared at the bottle. "Stay. The sound of someone else breathing in this mausoleum is actually comforting." He poured a drink but didn't drink it. He watched the liquid swirl. "What is your name?" "Natalie." "Natalie!" He tested the word. "Do you like this room, Natalie?" "I think." She hesitated. Honesty was a risk, but looking at his tired eyes, lying felt wrong. "I think it's lonely. The books are beautiful, but they're arranged by color, not by subject. It means no one is reading them." Henry froze. He looked up at the pristine, color-coded shelves, then back at her. A spark of surprise lit up his gaze. For the first time, the mask of a CEO slipped completely. "Victoria likes the aesthetic," he said dryly. "She says chaos is for the poor." "Then she must have a very boring soul," Natalie blurted out, then immediately clamped her hand over her mouth. "I am so sorry. I didn't mean." Henry didn't get angry. He laughed. It was a rusty and used sound, but it was genuine. "Don't apologize for the truth, Natalie. It's the only valuable thing in this building." He stood up, the moment of connection breaking as his phone began to buzz incessantly on the desk. The name Victoria flashed on the screen. The light returned to his eyes, the cold, distant light of Henry Thorne. "I have to take this," he said, his voice hardening again. "Finish the shelves, but leave the desk." He walked out, answering the phone with a weary, "Yes, darling," leaving Natalie alone in the darkening library. Her heart was racing. She had crossed a line. She had made the Prince of Wall Street laugh. She turned back to the shelves, her hands trembling slightly. She reached for a thick, leather-bound volume on the highest shelf, one that had been pushed far back, hidden behind a row of decorative encyclopedias. It wasn't part of the color-coded display. As she pulled it down to dust it, the book felt open in her hands. It wasn't a printed book. It was a hollowed-out box disguised as a classic novel. And inside, resting on velvet, was not a stack of cash or a weapon. It was a collection of old, Polaroid photographs and a bundle of handwritten letters tied with a frayed blue ribbon. Natalie knew she should close it. She knew the rule, do not touch. But the photo on top caught her eye. It was Henry, years younger, looking rugged and unkempt, laughing in a way she had just seen a glimpse of. His arm was around a woman, but the woman wasn't Victoria. She was a brunette with paint on her face and a wild, free smile. And on the back of the photo, written in Henry's distinct, sharp handwriting, was a date from only 6 months ago, long after his engagement to Victoria was announced, and a single sentence that shattered the image of the cold, loyal businessman. "To the only life that was ever real. I am counting the days until I can come back to you." Natalie's breath hitched. She wasn't just holding a secret. She was holding the evidence of a double life. Henry Thorne wasn't just a lonely rich man. He was a man in hiding, and whatever was in this box could destroy the perfect empire he was about to marry into. She heard his footsteps returning down the hall. Panic seized her. She had found the one thing even the fiancé didn't know, and now she had to hide it before the master of the house walked back through the door. Natalie shoved the hollowed-out book back onto the shelf with a trembling hand, the spine aligning perfectly with the others. Just a fraction of a second before, Henry walked back into the library. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, loud enough, she feared, to echo in the silent room. She had just peered into the soul of the Prince of Wall Street and found a stranger staring back. A man in love with a ghost. A man hiding a life vibrant with color inside a monochrome existence. Henry didn't notice her panic. He looked unspooled, like a clock spring wound too tight that had finally snapped. He discarded his phone on the desk as if it were a contaminated object and sank onto the leather sofa, burying his face in his hands. The confident, icy titan of industry was gone. In his place sat a man exhausted by the performance of being himself. "She wants to change the floral arrangements again," Henry murmured, his voice muffled by his palms. "Apparently, white lilies are too funereal for a winter wedding. She wants orchids. Imported. From Singapore." Natalie stood frozen by the ladder, clutching her duster. She should leave. The shift was over. But the gravitational pull of his sadness was stronger than her need to catch the 6 train. "Orchids are beautiful," Natalie said softly, daring to bridge the silence. "But they are temperamental. They need a specific environment to survive. Unlike lilies, which can bloom almost anywhere." Henry dropped his hands and looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, devoid of the corporate armor he wore like a second skin. He looked at her not as a fixture of the room, but as a sudden, unexpected source of oxygen. "Temperamental," he repeated, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "That sounds familiar." He gestured to the empty space on the sofa opposite him. It was a breach of protocol, so severe it made Natalie's palms sweat. "Sit for a moment. Natalie, please. I cannot talk about flowers anymore. Tell me something real. Tell me about the dust." Natalie hesitated, then perched on the edge of the velvet armchair, her posture rigid. "The dust is just time, sir. It settles on everything, waiting to be noticed." "You speak like a poet," Henry observed, his gaze drifting to her hands, which were gripping the fabric of her uniform. He narrowed his eyes slightly, leaning forward. "And you have ink on your fingers. Blue ink. On the side of your middle finger." Natalie instinctively curled her hand into a fist to hide the stain. It was the mark of her true life, the hours spent scribbling stories in cheap notebooks during her subway commutes. I write. Sometimes. When I'm not cleaning." "What do you write?" "Stories about people who are free," she whispered, the truth slipping out before she could catch it. Henry went still. The air between them thickened, charged with a sudden, intense intimacy. In this penthouse that scraped the sky, he was the prisoner, and she, the girl counting pennies for a Metro card, was the one who understood freedom. The irony hung heavy in the room, a silent chord vibrating between them. "We envy the bird for its wings, forgetting that the wind is cold." "I used to write," Henry confessed, his voice low, a secret shared in the twilight. "Letters. Thousands of them. I thought that if I put the words on paper, they would become real. But ink fades, doesn't it?" Natalie's mind flashed to the bundle of letters in the secret box, tied with a frayed blue ribbon. To the only life that was ever real. She knew exactly who he had written to. She knew he was mourning a living woman while planning a wedding to another. The weight of his secret pressed on her chest. She wanted to tell him she knew. She wanted to tell him that ink only fades if you close the book and never open it again. "Ink lasts longer than memory, Mr. Thorne," she said, holding his gaze. "If you keep it safe." Henry looked at her with a startling intensity. For a moment, the vast chasm of their social standing, the billions of dollars, the penthouse, the uniform evaporated. He was just a man drowning, and she was the only one on the shore. He reached out, his hand hovering over the coffee table between them, as if he wanted to touch the ink stain on her finger, to touch the creativity and the struggle that felt so foreign to his sterile world. "You are dangerous, Natalie," he murmured, the words barely audible. "Why?" she breathed. "Because you see the dust," he replied, "and you don't look away." The tension was palpable, a thin wire pulled taut, ready to snap. It was the dangerous, intoxicating hum of forbidden affinity. Henry leaned in closer, the scent of expensive sandalwood and weariness filling Natalie's senses. Then the elevator chimed. The sound was sharp, violent, shattering the bubble they had created. Henry recoiled instantly, his mask slamming back into place. He stood up, buttoning his jacket, transforming back into the Prince of Wall Street in the blink of an eye. The library doors swung open, and Victoria swept in. She was a vision of manicured perfection, dressed in white cashmere that cost more than Natalie's entire education. Her blonde hair was a helmet of glossy waves, her smile fixed and predatory. "Henry, darling!" she exclaimed, crossing the room in 3 strides to kiss his cheek. It was a kiss of ownership, not affection. She pulled back, her eyes immediately darting to Natalie, who had jumped to her feet. The warmth in the room vanished, replaced by an arctic chill. "Oh," Victoria said, her tone dripping with polite disdain. "I didn't realize we were entertaining the staff. Is the cleaning not finished? I specifically asked for the library to be done by 6. "She was just leaving," Henry said. His voice was flat, devoid of the emotion he had shown seconds ago. He didn't look at Natalie. He couldn't. He stared at the window, cowering behind his wall of indifference. "Good," Victoria sniffed, running a finger along the bookshelf Natalie had just dusted, the shelf hiding the secret box. "Because the caterers are coming tomorrow to finalize the menu, and I can't have clutter. You can go, whatever your name is." "Natalie," Henry said, the correction sharp and voluntary. Victoria turned to him, eyebrows raised. "Excuse me." "Her name is Natalie," Henry repeated, finally looking at his fiancée with cold, dead eyes. Natalie felt a surge of nausea. She grabbed her cleaning caddy, her face burning with humiliation. "I apologize, Miss Victoria. Have a good evening, Mr. Thorne." She rushed toward the door, feeling the crushing weight of the class divide slamming down on her. But as she reached the threshold, she glanced back one last time. Victoria was already talking about orchids, her hand resting carelessly on the spine of the fake book. Henry was watching Natalie leave, his expression a mask of agonizing, silent apology. A cage is still a cage, no matter how much gold you plate the bars with. Natalie stepped into the elevator, the silver doors closing like a guillotine. She was alone again, descending back to the earth, but her hands were shaking. She had seen the crack in Henry Thorne's armor. She knew his heart belonged to a woman from the past, and she knew he was terrified of the future he was buying. But worse than the secret she carried was the new, terrifying truth blooming in her own chest. She wasn't just observing his pain anymore. She was beginning to feel it as her own. And in the reflection of the elevator doors, the girl with ink on her fingers looked back at herself and realized she was falling for the man who was unattainable, compromised, and utterly lost. The penthouse was no longer a tomb, it was a stage set for a tragedy. 2 days had passed since the library incident, and the air was thick with the suffocating scent of thousands of Singaporean orchids. They arrived in wooden crates, choking the minimalist space with their aggressive, alien beauty. Natalie moved through the floral maze like a shadow, her head down, trying to make herself smaller than the furniture. She felt Henry's absence like a physical ache. He had retreated into work, leaving early and returning late, a ghost haunting his own life. Then came a crash. It wasn't the sound of glass breaking, but the heavy, dull thud of a hollow book hitting the marble coffee table. Natalie froze. She was polishing the grand piano in the corner of the living room, the scent of lemon oil sharp in her nose. Victoria stood by the fireplace, the secret hollowed-out novel lying open before her. The photos were scattered across the polished stone like debris from a collision. The letters, the frayed blue ribbon undone, lay exposed to the cold, recycled air of the penthouse. Victoria wasn't crying. She was smiling, a razor-thin expression that didn't reach her eyes. She held a gold lighter in her hand, the flame flickering dangerously close to the face of the brunette in the photograph. The elevator chimed. Henry walked in. He looked exhausted, his tie undone, carrying the weight of the empire on his shoulders. He stopped dead when he saw the scene. His eyes went from the open box to Victoria, and finally, to Natalie standing frozen in the corner. "You found my little time capsule," Victoria said, her voice smooth as silk wrapped around a knife. She didn't look at Henry, she looked at the flame. Such a sentimental collection. Henry. Elena. That was her name, wasn't it? The painter who lived in a loft in Brooklyn. "Victoria, put that down," Henry commanded, his voice shaking. He took a step forward, but Victoria brought the flame closer to the paper. "I didn't find it, darling," Victoria lied, turning her cold, predatory gaze to Natalie. "Your little maid did. She brought it to me this afternoon. Said she thought I should know what my future husband keeps hidden behind the classics. We destroy the things that make us feel, to survive the things that make us numb." Natalie gasped, the blood draining from her face. "No, Mr. Thorne, I never." "She said she was worried about your stability," Victoria continued, drowning out Natalie's plea with effortless malice. She dropped the lit lighter onto the pile of letters. The paper, old and dry, caught fire instantly. The words, "to the only life that was ever real," curled into black ash in seconds. Henry watched the fire consume his past. He didn't move to save it. He looked paralyzed. But inside, a heavy iron door was slamming shut. The vulnerability he had shown Natalie in the library now felt like a foolish mistake. He had let her in. He had let his guard down, and now his deepest secrets were burning on the table. The pain of losing Elena all over again was too sharp to process, so his mind converted it into the only fuel he had left: cold, blinding rage. He felt exposed, naked, and to a man like Henry Thorne, exposure was a threat that had to be eliminated. He needed to be the ruthless prince of Wall Street again, immediately, because the man who felt emotions was dying in that fire. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head to look at Natalie. The betrayal in his eyes was absolute. He didn't see the girl who understood the dust anymore. He saw the witness to his greatest weakness. "Henry, please!" Natalie stepped forward, tears stinging her eyes, her hands reaching out instinctively. "I didn't tell her. I kept your secret. I would never." "Get out," Henry whispered. The words were quiet, broken shards of glass. "Sir, listen to me. She's lying." "I said get out," Henry roared, the sound echoing off the glass walls, a release of all the agony he had been holding back. He lashed out not because he truly believed the lie, but because looking at Natalie hurt too much. She was the evidence of the heart he was trying to kill. He didn't look at Victoria. He glared at Natalie with a hatred born of heartbreak. He chose the easy lie over the difficult truth because he was too weak to fight anymore. Victoria watched the fire burn, triumphant. Natalie looked at Henry one last time, seeing the man she had started to love turning into the monster the city believed him to be. She didn't fight. She didn't beg. She realized with a crushing clarity that in his world, the truth was just another thing that could be burned. She turned and walked to the elevator, her footsteps silent on the marble. The doors closed on the image of Henry Thorne standing over the ashes of his true love, trapped in a cage of his own making, with a woman holding the key now exiled to the street below. The connection was severed. The fall was complete, and the silence that followed was the sound of a heart finally shutting its doors for good. 3 days of silence felt like 3 years of winter. The Thorne Tower stood impervious to the gray drizzle falling over Manhattan, a steel needle stitching the clouds to the pavement. Inside the penthouse, the air was scrubbed clean. The ashes of the letters had been vacuumed away, the scent of smoke replaced by the cloying sweetness of fresh orchids. Henry Thorne moved through the preparations for his engagement gala like a man walking to his own execution. He signed checks, he nodded at florists, but his eyes were vacant. He had destroyed the past to secure a future he didn't want, and in doing so, he had exiled the only person who had made the present moment bearable. Natalie stood in the service lobby of the tower, 30 floors below the glass cage. She wasn't there to beg. She was there to return her key card and collect her final, Severance check, a hush money payment Victoria had messengered over with an NDA attached. Natalie held the pen, hovering over the legal document that demanded her silence, her hand trembling not from fear, but from the sharp, stinging pain that radiated from her palm. She signed her name, Natalie, just ink on paper. As she turned to leave, the private elevator doors hissed open. Henry stepped out. He looked haggard, the lines around his eyes etched deeper than before. He was escaping the suffocating perfume of his own apartment, seeking the anonymity of the street. When he saw her standing by the security desk, he froze. The anger that had fueled him upstairs evaporated, leaving only a cold, heavy shame. "You signed it," Henry said, his voice flat, looking at the document on the counter. "Good. It's better this way." "Is it?" Natalie asked. She didn't lower her gaze this time. She looked straight at the Prince of Wall Street, her eyes burning with a quiet fury. "Is it better to pay for silence than to listen to the truth?" "The truth is you sold me out," Henry snapped, his defense mechanism kicking in. "You took the one thing that mattered to me and gave it to Victoria for, what? A bonus. Job security. I didn't give her anything." Natalie stepped closer, ignoring the security guard who started to rise. "She found the box days ago, Henry. She was waiting for the moment that would hurt you the most. She wanted to burn your memories, and she needed a scapegoat to make sure you didn't hate her for doing it." "Why should I believe you?" Henry challenged, though his voice wavered. "You're the one who found it. You're the one with the motive." "My motive?" Natalie laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "I'm a maid, Henry. I clean up messes, I don't make them. And unlike you, I don't destroy the things I love just because I'm scared." She held up her right hand. For the first time, Henry looked, really looked. Across her palm and wrapping around the side of her hand was a raw, angry red burn, blistered and painful. It was fresh. The body keeps the score that the mind tries to forget. Henry stared at the wound, the color draining from his face. "What is that?" "I tried to reach into the fire," Natalie whispered, her voice breaking. When she dropped the lighter, "I tried to pull the letters out. I burned my hand trying to save your memories, Henry, while you just stood there and watched them burn." The revelation hit Henry with the force of a physical blow. Victoria wouldn't have burned herself. A traitor wouldn't have risked her skin for a pile of old paper. The burn was a brand of loyalty, a physical testament to the truth he had been too blind and too cowardly to see. He had accused the woman who tried to save him and married the woman who held the match. You tried to save Elena," Henry breathed, reaching out instinctively, but stopping inches from her injured hand. "I tried to save you," Natalie corrected him, tears finally spilling over. "Because I knew those letters were the only proof you had that you were once alive." The lobby fell silent. The hustle of the city outside seemed to fade. Henry looked at the burn, then at Natalie's face, and the walls of his denial crumbled. He realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had let his fear of confrontation, his duty to the merger, and his own self-loathing dictate his reality. He had thrown away a diamond to keep a stone. "I am a coward," Henry admitted, the confession tearing out of his throat. "I let her burn them because I was too afraid to admit that I haven't been happy since the day those letters were written. And I blamed you because you were the only one who saw through the lie." "Ink lasts longer than memory, Henry," Natalie said, repeating the words from the library, the leitmotif piercing his heart. "But only if you fight for it." "I fought. You didn't." She turned to the door, pushing it open to the cold November wind. She was leaving. She had cleared her name, but she couldn't fix his life. "Wait," Henry called out. It wasn't a command this time. It was a plea. He walked past the security desk, stepping out of the gilded cage of the lobby and onto the dirty welcome mat. "Don't go back to the shadows, Natalie." "Not yet." He stood there, a billionaire in a bespoke suit looking utterly impoverished before a maid with a bandage on her hand. The reconciliation hadn't fully happened. The trust was bruised, the hurt was deep, but the truth was out. The lie was dead, and for the first time in years, Henry Thorne wasn't looking up at his tower. He was looking at the woman standing in front of him, realizing that she was the only real thing in his entire manufactured world. The wind outside the Thorne Tower was biting, carrying the grit of a city and the exhaust of a million taxis, but for Henry Thorne, it tasted like the first breath of clean air he had taken in a decade. He stood on the sidewalk, the imposing glass monolith rising behind him like a tombstone to his former self. He looked at Natalie, shivering in her thin coat, clutching her injured hand, and then he looked back at the golden revolving doors. He realized then that he couldn't go back up. Not to the penthouse. Not to the orchids. Not to the lie. "I can't fix the burn on your hand," Henry said, his voice quiet, almost lost in the traffic noise. He reached up and slowly undid his silk tie, the symbol of his corporate armor, and let it hang loose around his neck. "And I can't unburn the letters, but I can stop the fire." He didn't make a grand scene. He didn't storm back inside to scream at Victoria. He simply turned his back on the tower. He took his phone, the device that tethered him to the Empire, and powered it off. The screen went black, silencing the notifications, the demands, the merger. "Where are you going?" Natalie asked, watching him with wary eyes. She was still hurting, her trust fractured, but the raw honesty in his posture kept her feet planted. "I don't know," Henry admitted, looking at the chaotic street as if seeing it for the first time. "Somewhere where the dust is allowed to settle. Walk with me." It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation to the unknown. Natalie hesitated, looking at the scar on her palm, then at the man who was dismantling his life in real time. She nodded. Freedom is not knowing the destination, but choosing the path. They walked for hours. They walked until the skyline of the financial district faded into the eclectic, messy vibrancy of the village. They didn't speak of love or romance. They spoke of the things that had been silenced in the penthouse. Henry spoke of the pressure to be a monument rather than a man. Natalie spoke of the characters in her head, the stories she wrote on napkins and receipts. The reconciliation didn't happen overnight. It happened in the quiet spaces of the months that followed. Henry broke the engagement the next morning. It was a scandal that fed the tabloids for weeks. The Prince of Wall Street abdicates, but Henry didn't read them. He moved out of the penthouse and into a brownstone in Brooklyn, a place with creaky floorboards and drafty windows, a place that felt alive. Spring arrived, melting the gray slush of the city. Natalie was no longer cleaning glass cages. She was sitting in a sun-drenched corner of a small bookstore, typing on a laptop Henry had gifted her, not as a patron, but as a believer in her work. The bell above the door chimed. Henry walked in. He looked different. The sharp, predatory angles of his face had softened. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a corduroy jacket and jeans, his hands stained not with money, but with ink. He had started writing again. Real letters. To no one. To everyone. To himself. He walked over to her table, placing a coffee down next to her laptop. He sat opposite her, just as he had in the library that first night, but this time there was no uniform and no fear between them. "I finished it," Henry said softly, placing a thick envelope on the table. It wasn't a deed or a check. It was a manuscript. His memoir. The truth about the business, the family, the pressure, and the woman he had loved and lost, Elena. He had finally exorcised the ghost not by hiding her in a box, but by letting her go on paper. Natalie placed her hand on the envelope. Her burn had healed into a silvery scar, a permanent map of her courage. "Did you write about the fire?" she asked. "I wrote about the woman who reached into it," Henry replied, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "I wrote about the day I realized that the only thing more dangerous than fire is the cold." He reached out and took her scarred hand. The touch was grounding, electric, and deeply familiar. They were no longer the billionaire and the maid. They were two writers, two survivors, drafting a new chapter together. "You were right, you know," Henry whispered, tracing the line of her scar with his thumb. "About the leitmotif of my life." "Which part?" Natalie smiled, a genuine warmth lighting up her face. "Ink lasts longer than memory," Henry recited, the words hanging in the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. "But only if you have the courage to write the truth. And only if you keep it safe," Natalie finished, squeezing his hand. They didn't need the penthouse view. They had the view of each other, unvarnished and real. Henry had lost his empire, his fiancée, and his status, but as he looked at Natalie, the woman who had seen him when he was invisible to the world, he knew he had gained the only thing that mattered. He leaned across the table, kissing her softly. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was a kiss of gratitude, of presence, of two people finally arriving at the same place at the same time. He had hired her to clean the surface of his life, never suspecting that she would be the one to break the glass, sweep away the ashes, and show him that a house is not a home until you are brave enough to let the dust settle and the truth breathe.